Hello and welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers, the podcast for those curious about creating a more fulfilling work life. Every business boils down to two basics, people and money. Here we focus on the human side. Numbers matter, but people matter most, and people drive performance. I'm Susan Nichriadon, your host, a coach, consultant, facilitator and author of Leading Beyond the Numbers. It brings me joy to speak to people and explore together how, although we share many similarities as humans, each of us navigates the world through our own unique lens. This adds intricacy to our interactions and contributes to both the depth and difficulties of interpersonal relationships. Join us for stories, strategies, and insights to help you lead your life beyond the numbers. Well, today I am delighted to welcome Anna Clements to Life Beyond the Numbers. Anna, you're so welcome.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
And Anna, I think you might be the first person who is sitting in what looks like a little recording studio.
It is indeed a acoustically treated, soundproofed booth, Studio Bricks booth it's called, and it is specifically for recording audio.
Wow, and we'll come to why a bit later on. I've had all sorts of guests on this podcast over the years. And when I started the podcast first, it was originally to talk to people who'd had careers in finance and had moved beyond that. And I moved beyond that myself and changed it more to numbers and things. But anyway, now it's just the name. But your career change beyond the numbers is quite fascinating. So maybe you would tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got there.
Wow. So long story short, I guess, at 19, I thought I wanted to be a singer. I was aware that I enjoyed using my voice. I sang in the school choir. I sang at church, non-professionally, but it was my happy space. And I took myself up to central London at 18 and I did a half-day course about voice work. And at the time it was when you would record your voice on a tape and they said, if you give us £400, we'll create a demo for you. This is the late 80s. I didn't have £400. And so I went home and I told my parents, I said, I think I want to be a singer, not to be famous or a pop star, but to professionally go into a studio and create harmonies or sing radio jingles. I'm not sure, but I don't know what to do or how to do it. And they said, oh, you have to be really good to do that. And I went, oh. And so I went to university and studied economics, which I liked. And I worked at the Spanish embassy in the finance department. And then I did several years of temping work in the city, which was interesting and fulfilled my natural inclination to always want to be doing something different. So from one week to the next, I was in a different department, whether it was insurance or mergers and acquisitions or some corporation where I was just answering the phone. It was always different and often bilingual. I'm Spanish by birth. So often I was employed for my ability to translate contracts or whatever. Long story short, fell in love, moved to North Devon, which isn't London and doesn't have much call for either Spanish or finance, and basically got into sort of computing, programming, organizing systems within companies, and then sort of back into finance, paying checks, wages, those sorts of the ordinary things you do once you become a mother and a homeowner and you're just looking to pay the bills. And I hit midlife and went, this isn't how this was supposed to turn out. I was supposed to do the singing thing. So at this point, my kids are sort of mid-primary school and they're starting to do trumpet lessons and piano lessons and violin. And everything's just an optional extra. They only ever did the free lessons or the initial excitement. My youngest particularly was really good at starting something and then starting something else. And often I paid for 4 lessons and she went to 2. And so I would turn up and go, I know it's not me, it's her you're expecting, but she won't come and I've paid to, could I just talk to you about trumpet or about music or about, and I realized I was the one who was excited about the lessons. And so I started taking piano lessons, and my piano teacher at about grade 3 realized that it was actually singing I was after, but I was too afraid to say. So I started taking singing lessons, got right through to ABRSM grade 5, took music theory grade 5, because you have to be able to progress, and then went, it's actually performing I'm after. So I got into musical theatre. I'd been doing a lot of sort of classical charity work and concerts and things. Got into musical theatre, got the lead in several shows. The North Devon has a really good theatre where a lot of travelling companies come through, and a professional company came through, lost their female lead, auditioned for the part, and I got it. And I'm like, oh, you can be paid for this? So it just started this whole roller coaster of realizing I lived in North Devon. The choice was to move back to London or Bristol perhaps, but I had a 10 and an 8-year-old. It wasn't going to happen. So I bought a microphone and got fascinated by acoustics, sound engineering, did lots of online courses. There's a lovely thing called MOOC, massive online open courses. All the universities of the world offer free courses. I did an 8-week vocal intensive thing, and then a sound engineering, and then another one all through Berklee College of Music, and just became obsessed with sound and this idea that actually, as most voice artists will tell you, I began with 2 ironing boards and a duvet to work through the acoustics and the sound engineering. I started thinking I wanted to get into sort of video games and radio commercials. Pretty quickly discovered my voice was suited for corporate narration and e-learning, all of which are much more long form and require a more articulate voice, less of a character voice. It was Freudian slip on that word, I'm sure. And then discovered audiobooks. And that was 8 years ago. Sort of for probably about 8 years, I'd been doing this whole process of kind of rediscovering myself. And then 8 years ago, discovered audiobooks and haven't really looked back. Audiobooks have become my way to connect to a performance side of me while still needing the kind of business side and the requirements for marketing and self-promotion and all of the things that go with the creative life that is slightly unexpected, I think, sometimes. So it's been joyful to find a space where I'm able to go beyond the numbers and still have it be part and parcel of my life.
Absolutely. Wow, there is so much in there, Anna. Thank you so much. And I had questions pinging all over the place. I want to go right back to when you were 18, 19, because you said something that really struck me, that singing was your happy space. And then in a blog or something you said, I sometimes think that I left it too late to find my bliss. So listening to you now, it all sounds like it happened as it was meant to or supposed to. But I wonder if you would talk about that a little bit more.
I think early on, particularly when I realized how much joy there was to be had in life, full stop, in your job and in people paying you to do something you actually enjoy, blew my mind. After 20 years of office work, I was like, wait, I get to have fun and they pay me? I was really surprised by that. And I was asked by a lot of people, why didn't you do this sooner? People will often say, I only wish I'd started 10 years ago. And actually, I'm aware now that I coach now narrators and authors who want to narrate their own books, and I'm aware that what we bring to the microphone, the reason we sound the way we do, is because of who we are, and who we are is constantly changing, thank goodness. And so although I thought I wanted to get into voice work at 19, I didn't have the life experience, the steel determination required. I didn't have any of those things, hence the reason I didn't do it then, kind of thing. And I think sometimes you have to recognize that things happen when they're ready. I'm very into self-help and all the reasons why we do and don't do things. And I worry a lot about self-doubt and procrastination and all those things. But I don't think this was that. I don't think it was me wishing it but putting it off. It was actually that I didn't have the capacity to understand how much I didn't know and the willingness to undertake it so that I could know it and get better at it, which I've now dedicated myself to.
And I suppose in a way, many of us have that spark, Anna, from that childhood passion. And I know we talk about that, what you're passionate about and things you loved, and tell us when you were 6 years old what you were obsessed with, that kind of stuff. But It's interesting, isn't it, how the expression of who we are can become something that we use to make money or to survive in this world, however you want to say it, or and actually thrive. So we're not
Yes.
surviving any longer, we're thriving. And I suppose if there are people listening to this now who this is reminding them of their own spark, what would you say to somebody?
I think maybe 15, 20 years ago, I was under the impression that it was obviously not meant for me. I was aware of it being something that I enjoyed and wanted to do, but I wasn't one of those people. And I'm reminded of a lovely one of those apocryphal stories that probably isn't a true story about two women, short version. I'll give you the punchline. The idea is that the first thought that we have when something occurs and we think something is actually the one we're socially programmed to think. Our immediate reaction is the one that's acceptable, the one that everybody else says. I'm not made to be a singer. I'm not supposed to be on stage. It isn't what my family does. It isn't what we do. Just stop it, you know? Your second thought is actually your own. And I think sometimes it's really difficult to break away from either the awareness of that or just your upbringing, the tradition that is your family and the people you hang with, the people you socialize with. If those people go to an office every day, work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, so do you, and you don't think twice about it. And it's difficult sometimes to break away from that space or to become a person that doesn't fulfill that criteria almost. My mother still thinks it's a hobby, despite the fact that I've paid my mortgage for the last 10 years on it. And every time I get a new book, she'll say, and they're paying you for that. But I've had to go, I've had to go beyond it's not even hurt anymore, actually. It's her disbelief and the awareness that actually that's her own limitation about how far she feels she could go. And it doesn't necessarily have to be mine. And discovering that was my saving grace.
Wow, that's fascinating. And yes, we do have so many views of how life is supposed to be or should be. And I don't know if you've heard of the Zanders, Benjamin Zander, and he was the conductor of one of the philharmonics, I think
Yes.
Boston or New York, one of the big orchestras. And he's written a book with his wife called The Art of Possibility.
Ooh.
Yeah, and it's a fabulous book. And one of the things he tells you throughout the book is basically everything's made up. Everything is made up. But we get fixated on how things show up in a societal structure, and it just seems like it's the way things are meant to be. So, what is it like, Anna, to live life outside of that structure as such?
It's not easy, actually. Thank you for asking. That's a question I've not been asked before. Sorry, I must just, the thought that's occurring to me is not unlike that book. The one that changed things for me was a book by Benjamin Hardy called Personality Isn't Permanent. And the idea of possibility, as you described in that title, I think made me suddenly go, oh, there are other options? And I think what I'm grateful for is having been able to do it, having been able to continue to take small steps. You know, originally the first 4 or 5 years, I still had a job while I was doing all of this. So it's not like it was an overnight wonder. I only went full time in 2017, having been doing it consciously since 2009. But before that, music and a consciousness and awareness of wanting to shift. So, you know, this overnight excitement takes time. But I think all the fantastic things aside, the wonderful consciousness and awareness of being able to support yourself with a thing that you absolutely love, comes an idea that actually you almost don't fit the mold that you were supposedly given. There is this kind of feeling of, particularly with my parents, confusion on their part and worry, I guess, that I've entered into this, what my family always saw as a creative endeavor where there is no money to be made and no life to be had, and you'll only end up sad and crying, which doesn't have to be true, you know. Perhaps what I haven't enjoyed is the feeling of being an outsider, the having to kind of break away from the feeling of being the good daughter and doing as I'm supposed to, and thereby disappointing people, quite literally. But the consciousness and awareness of the fact that it's their disappointment, their limitations, their issues, none of which actually were holding me back. It was only me holding me back by believing what they believed. So I really needed to just try things. And that's a personality thing on my part. It got me into a lot of trouble as a child. But the trying new things and going, yes, I might fall over or I might fail, but I wonder what it feels like, or I wonder what it tastes like, or I wonder what sensations it brings up. And that for me has always been an ongoing life ideal. And so that curiosity, once I allowed it to come to fruition, it's led me down very exciting and wonderful paths. You know, I've done so many incredible things over the last 10 years that 15 years ago I would have gone, who's that? What are you talking about? So it's been an incredible journey, and long may it continue.
And you're absolutely beaming, because I don't put the video out, Anna, for this. So for everybody listening, Anna has the biggest smile on her face and she's all lit up, and it's just such a pleasure to see that in somebody as well. And I wish all our workplaces in the world that people were like this.
Indeed. Yeah.
But that's for another conversation. Reading some of your blogs and your LinkedIn profile, I guess the thing that stands out as well is language and the sound of language. And sound is something I think about a lot, because music isn't all that important to me. And I've had debates with people about whether I could live without it and so on. But I think sound is. And so I'm curious about language, sound, growing up bilingual. I'm throwing everything into this question, as you can tell. And then how that brought you to audiobooks, because of course I like to read, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners like to read. And the experience of the sound of the book as opposed to reading a book.
Wow, what a question. I'm the youngest of four. And what I've been fascinated by is the fact that although I was actually born in London, my brothers and sisters were all born in Spain, and my mother was pregnant with me when the whole family moved to London in the 60s. So I grew up in a household where we all spoke Spanish, but I went to school in English. And curiously, as brothers and sisters, we all spoke to each other in English because that's how we lived our lives at school. But our parents spoke Spanish and we spoke Spanish with them. So there was this ongoing kind of back and forth. My father would say something in Spanish, we might reply in English, and vice versa. But there was a huge mix of language always at home, but a fascination with the fact that there were certain words we used in both languages where, despite which language you were speaking in, the word would come out in the language that it was used in. I don't know if that makes sense. And so sometimes we grew up as teenagers and would suddenly go, how do you actually say a particular word in English? I've never used that word in that circumstance. At 18, I was fascinated by the fact that I was Spanish. I have a Spanish passport, I have Spanish parents, but I had never lived in Spain. And so I moved to Madrid for 2 years. And I thought I spoke Spanish fluently until I tried to open a bank account and get a job and buy groceries, and suddenly realized that what I knew was holiday Spanish. I could speak with my cousins about school, I could tell my parents about my day, but I had no concept and no vocabulary for actual forms and, you know, filling out things or receipts or buying in a shop. It was a really interesting kind of immersion. And because I have no accent in Spanish, people had no expectation of me not understanding or not knowing what they were saying. And so it became this ongoing kind of fascination, yes, with words and things that you can interpret with your face and your body without saying the word if you don't know what it is. I then went to university and studied economics, and my third year was actually spent in Italy, in Milan, doing economics in Italian, which, as you can imagine, yes, it was a lot. Again, because I thought I spoke Spanish, therefore how hard can Italian be? But actually, once you get past how old are you and what's your name, it's not the same at all. So we did an 8-week intensive Italian course and then 4 months of Italian economics lessons. And it was fascinating. And again, the ability to describe what you mean because you don't have the word for it, and then hear the word and learn it. The learning process behind learning languages just fascinated me. I'd done French all the way through school, so I was throwing in anything I could use to attempt to get myself understood. And it developed into this awareness of how people use their voices, accents, intonation, how people say one thing but mean another, which is a very British trait. Doesn't happen at all in Spain, doesn't happen at all in America. People are very straight with their words. If they say it, that's what they mean. Whereas in Britain, you can say, do you want a cup of tea? Oh, that'd be lovely. Meaning, and you're not offering me wine because... but other countries don't hear that suggestion. And so again, audiobooks has allowed me to play with all of those things, not just the obvious very British older men who all have these voices in the historical fiction and all those kinds of things, but the fascination between genders, how people speak differently, and it isn't just about all the women speaking up here and all the men speaking down here, and it's much more about our physical presence, our views on life actually affect how we phrase our sentences, how many words we use in a sentence, whether we have very clipped short sentences because we're actually very insular. All of those things just fascinate me. I am fascinated by people and language. And I mentioned the being the youngest of four because of the four of us, we've all turned out really differently. We obviously all speak Spanish fluently, but my brother, who was 3 when they moved here, spent most of my child life refusing to speak Spanish because at school he was told off for it. And so he would only ever answer in English. My sister really struggled. She was 8, nearly 9 when she got here, didn't speak any English, so she had to go to kindergarten to learn her ABCs and was mortified at having to sit with the 4 and 5-year-olds. And so all of us had really different experiences of what it means to know another language or to understand another culture. And so I've been lucky in that my brain, I have ADHD, I am very curious about life, I'm very fascinated by all sorts of different things all the time. And that has never gone away, and for that I'm really grateful. And it's led me here, which is wonderful.
And again, there's so much in that answer. And it reminds me a little bit, because I grew up in the southwest of Ireland and I did all of my schooling through Irish. So I was bilingual. Now, we didn't speak Irish at home, but it is fascinating because some people did. It was their first language. And there are words, I know exactly what you mean. There are words that there isn't a word for it in the other language. And sometimes that can be quite frustrating.
Yes.
And it's fascinating as well when you start to learn other cultures and the words that they have for things. It can really broaden how you can express yourself. And one of the things you said about being bilingual is you have twice as much to say.
I was accused, my school reports all said if Anna only spoke a little less and spent a little more time focusing on her work. It's the kind of typical artist story of usually sticking my foot in it, usually saying far too much. But what I think it made me is actually just very friendly. It's just really easy for me to make other people feel at ease. And so in doing that, I tend to have to use lots of words to work out whether the other person wants to be chatted with, whether they're okay, whether the situation is too complicated. And so I'm constantly putting myself in places where I'm possibly outside of my comfort zone. And my antidote for feeling uncomfortable is to be chatty.
I've heard of worse ones. And as you're talking, Anna, I'm thinking about breath as well, because I guess breath and how we breathe has a lot to do with how we sound.
Very much so. I was really grateful that I did 5 years of classical singing before I got into musical theatre and the stage, and then had to learn how different the stage is to the microphone. But the breathing, as you say, it's curious. As I mentioned, I coach early narrators, and often they do a thing which we call the catch breath, which is they'll get to the end of a sentence and then they'll start another sentence. And there's this sense of, I must take in a lot of breath because now I have to read an entire sentence. When actually, when we're speaking in conversation, our brains mostly don't think about how much breath we're using. And you certainly don't take a large inhalation in anticipation of a large thought. It just happens and you just keep going. And so sometimes in audiobooks, there is a sense of making sure that you're aware of the sense of the paragraph rather than being afraid of the full stops or how far away they are. Because often people will see 2 or 3 lines of words and go, oh, here comes a big sentence. And that's not how we speak when we speak. Audiobooks, when I began, were kind of about articulate and eloquent, but now they're very much about conversational and easy on the ear and as if a friend were chatting with you. And so it's very much become this idea of a conversational read.
And as you're talking, I'm also thinking about an interview situation in a workplace or something like that, where people maybe are feeling a bit anxious, and because that their breathing has become more shallow and they are struggling maybe a little bit to say what it is they have to say. So how much does it impact our day-to-day representation of ourselves when we're a bit stressed?
Again, my fascination with all things human and the nervous system, as it were, began with music. So when I'd done 2 or 3 years of classical singing, my singing teacher said, you need to start performing. You need to start doing charity concerts and anything people will let you do, go out and perform and discover. And I went to my very first concert, and after spending 25 minutes outside, unwilling to go in, I was convinced by a lady at a bus stop, because I was about to get the bus home, to go in. And I was third up in the list of people singing. And I went up and my piano teacher was there and she played the opening bars. And I went to take a breath and my entire body was frozen in fright. 200 people looking at me and my ribs didn't move. And I was aware that I had 8 seconds to decide whether or not my mother was right. And luckily, it's given me heebie-jeebies just thinking about it. Luckily, I remembered that this was where I wanted to be. This is what I want to do. And I relaxed enough for my body to go and take a breath, because breathing is what we do. It's a very natural thing. So actually, you have to stop yourself breathing. You have to freeze your muscles and tell your body not to breathe, which is also a very natural state, but usually when you're afraid for your life. And so the consciousness of that, what it takes to remind your body that you're okay, the relaxation required to be ordinary, as it were, is a lot, and a conscious lot. And then you have to lose the consciousness so that it sounds natural. So it's an ongoing kind of, I made it sound more complicated than it is, but there is a technique to it, and an awareness of body and of self is all part and parcel of that.
And the practice, like I think what the person said to you is go out and discover. So that's effectively what you were doing, and giving your body the sense that you were safe on the stage, opening your mouth to 200 people. That is quite a discovery. So yeah, and quite a story. It reminded me of something that you have in one of your blogs as well, and in bold and capital letters is like, oh, I couldn't do that. And how many of us think, so people are probably listening going, I could never do what Anna's just done.
I talk about the concert as if it was my very first time, and obviously it wasn't. You know, I was, I don't know, on the Parents Association, so at some point I had to stand up and do the raffle at school. I called bingo when I was young, you know, at events and stuff. So I think sometimes there's a sense that there are smaller steps you can take that will get you to the point, even if it's just sitting your family down and saying, I need you all to listen to me for a second. Those are people you are comfortable with. You're accustomed to them not listening to you. Getting control of that crowd is a start, if that's where you have to start. So I think sometimes it's about working your way up to, and also working out what it is you're actually afraid of. You know, what will happen if you fail? My kids used to do those little festivals that come round where a child reads poetry and then 6 other children read poetry and everybody claps and the adjudicator says you're all incredible. And I like it, and I encouraged my kids to do it because it's a life experience. Standing up in front of a crowd and going, why are they all looking at me, is an experience in and of itself. My youngest, who I think was about 8 at the time, had practiced this poem over and over ad nauseum at home. We all knew it backwards. And the day comes and it's her turn and she's third in the queue and she's sat at the front and she walks up on stage and she turns and she looks at the audience. And I saw her freeze. And this poem came out of her in a stilted, disorganized fashion because she knew it off by heart, but she was so conscious of the crowd. And she finished and everybody applauded. She came and sat down and she said, I was so scared. Can I do it again? And I went, what? And so we came back. Luckily, we'd entered her in 2 things. The next day she came back and did it again. And we had these ongoing conversations about the fact that the audience doesn't actually care how good you are so long as they don't feel worried for you. So if you have a cold, they don't mind. They assume that's how you sound. If you forget a line, they forgive you so long as you keep going. And so we would have these ongoing conversations about, ultimately, how do you make other people feel comfortable? And therefore, how do you make yourself relax, knowing that you're in charge of making these people feel comfortable? And suddenly performing becomes a sharing of information that you've done nothing but practice ahead of time. You're prepared, you're ready. What's not to enjoy? And so suddenly it stops being about What if they all point and laugh? What if I forget my costume? What if my glasses fall off my head? You know, all the things that we worry about, actually, if you are relaxed and confident about what you're feeling, it becomes part of the show. You know, oh, there go my glasses again. People don't mind so long as you're in control. And by being up on the stage or in front of a class or at the front of a meeting, people are already ready to listen to you. And so suddenly there's this feeling whereby it's not a performance as such, it's just your turn. And I think sometimes making less of it allows you to get out there and take action. The biggest antidote for fear is action. We can sit at home and worry and be upset and anticipate and have anxiety. And I still do have anxiety when I do public speaking and stuff. But the minute I get on the stage, I'm there to reassure the crowd that I've got this and they mustn't worry. And that's how I deal with it.
Yeah, and I always think as well, like the people, like you said, because you're there, they're already willing to listen to you. They want you to do well. And they're also probably quite relieved it's not them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think you've got quite a lot of leeway.
Yes.
It's that when things start to fall apart, then you will lose them quite quickly if there's too much of an expectation gap there.
Yes.
But it's quite. So audiobooks have just like grown in popularity in the last number of years, Anna. And did you foresee that happening?
No, I can't claim that. I can't claim that at all. I think I was just not so much in the right place at the right time. I just happened to like the right thing at the right time. And I have got better and better at it, and therefore more aware and more excited about the industry and where things are, you know, where to find work, how to actually get into it, what to do. And now sharing that information brings me just as much joy as the narration itself. The being able to tell good stories and read books and then be able to narrate them. I mean, what's not to and then they pay me. I'm still shocked, 8 years in, and I'm still shocked, but thrilled that I get to do this. And it's wonderful. It really is.
Was there a standout book that you have narrated? Like what typically the genre? I mean, you talked about e-learning and corporate, but obviously there's audiobooks as well. So have you had a book that you enjoyed above all others, or you learned something that you never knew? You know what I mean? Like, because you get a privileged place.
Yes, very much so. My genres I was going to say of choice, but they're not. They're the genres that the industry has dictated, that according to the sound I make, these are the books that my voice suits. And it tends to be historical fiction and non-fiction. And the historical fiction tend to be sort of 1800s, usually women empowerment. So some spinster who's an archaeology professor who is also a murder mystery detective. Or the non-fiction ones I really enjoy actually are usually about politics or law or how society changes over time. I just did one about how to get your teenager out of their bedroom and about talking to teenagers as a parent, which I'd gone through. My girls are in their 20s now, but they're all life experiences, particularly the non-fiction book, that are really fascinating to just witness, really, which is all we're doing. And there's a real difference between interpreting the narrative of a fiction book and the characters within it, which is all about kind of discovering their backstory, their personalities, why they want to travel to Australia and live there instead, or be a serial murderer, whatever it happens to be. And the non-fiction books, which tend to be about getting into the passion of the author, which ultimately is also a character. So you're really living the dream of why they are fascinated by how toothbrushes are produced, or whatever the thing is somebody has bothered to spend several years writing about. There's a reason why they were so excited. And often, if you're well cast, the passion transcends the book. The reason cast me in the last book I did for them was actually more to do with my experience of having lived in Devon, and that was where this horror was taking place. And so I was able to understand and therefore express the views of the characters and the places they were living and the things they were going through. So casting is really important too. Whereas we're all very good narrators and very good at what we do tend to sit within particular genres. Certain voices do particular genres well, which is interesting again.
And is there a reason that the author doesn't narrate their own book?
A lot of authors do, and do it very well. Non-fiction particularly, people will write their own non-fiction books and they will then go and give talks on it. Often they've written the book because that's what they do. And so often their fan base will expect to hear their voice. And there's very famous, I don't think of anybody now, but Brene Brown, for example, who is famous for all her talks. You expect to hear her voice when you turn on her book. And there are some authors who wish they could and want to, but writing and narrating are really different careers. They're really different jobs. And some people can, and some people go, oh, this is harder than I thought. Or I'm not getting the juice out of the words that I wrote, which when they then hear somebody else narrate, go, that's the voice I was after. One thing I always say to authors who don't want to narrate their own book is don't produce an audiobook with a voice just to have an audiobook. Be in love with that voice. Know that that is the voice that represents you and the characters in your book. Make sure that that matchmaking has worked for you. It isn't just a business partnership. For me, it's really about a team effort. The narrator has understood your book and really is bringing it to life for you.
And it's funny, isn't it? I think a lot of the time, stuff that goes on behind the scenes, we never really think about it. Like even in a movie, you tend not to think about who cast the people and why they were perfect for things. And with audiobooks, I think anything that we can consume the way we do, because we just press a button, we forget about the world that goes on behind it, because you're not the only audiobook narrator. You're the first person I ever met that narrated audiobooks.
There are
you're
lots
not
of
alone.
us.
Yeah.
I can assure you. Yes, there are lots of us. And there's a fascination for the industry as well. So I run a weekly session on an app called Clubhouse, which is an audio-only app, where all we do is talk about audiobook narration. From one week to the next, it might be about authors looking for narrators, or narrators going, how do I spend 4 hours in the booth without wishing I was somewhere else, kind of thing. So the conversation is always varied, but it's a curious thing when, for example, on reviews for books, I got a review recently that said, I think I might have preferred to have read this than listened to it, but both narrators did really well. And it was just me. So I'm not overly sure what that person was hearing, or if my character voices were that good, she thought it was another person. And then I'll get reviews that say, this book would have been better as a dual narration, which is where either the chapters are written alternately and men, women, or whatever, two people will narrate their own chapters, or duet narration, whereby the male character, for example, will read his lines of dialogue and then the narrator will narrate their part. What people don't realize is that the minute you introduce a second narrator, you're paying twice as much, because the production of that, of having two narrators in two different places, either bringing them together in a studio or trying to collate that and edit and master that audio, is much more expensive. I go around to writers' groups as well and talk through this whole process, because people are often just curious. They don't have audiobooks because they don't know they can, and are curious about how it works. So it is, the whole thing is fascinating to me, and I love talking about it all the time. Luckily.
Luckily. And do you need to protect your voice, Anna?
Very much so. So things like going out to parties or going out drinking or being hungover, can't do that anymore. I need to be conscious of what I'm doing the following day always. Funny things like going to concerts where you find yourself singing along to whoever you're seeing, the next day will affect your voice too. Going to a party where you don't think you're raising your voice, but you're having to raise it just that little bit to be heard above the noise of everybody else talking. It's lovely to be here. Suddenly, when you get home, you realize you've lost your voice. The ringing in your ears from being at a concert or in a place with loud music, all of those things affect the levels on the microphone, how well you can hear yourself within your own head. Health, general colds and coughs. You have to be really conscious of being around germs. People talk a lot about sort of spicy foods and coffee and tea. I'm not as affected by those as other people might. And I think there's a lot more fear around kind of dairy products and so on. But if you ordinarily do that and you speak all day, then just don't do anything you don't normally do. And hydration is key. Hydration is always your friend. Drink lots of water, but don't drink it in the moment. You have to drink it the night before or before the session at some point. And again, it's an awareness of how your body personally works, how long you're willing to sit still for a length of time. The sessions of audiobook recording, particularly if you go to a studio, run 9:30 to 5:30. You take an hour for lunch and there's a 15-minute break halfway through the morning. So you're sat for an hour and a half, 2 hours at a time, just reading from a book. I don't know if to say it's a personality trait, but it's certainly a personality type. We are all of a similar willingness to be alone for lengths of time, extroverts and introverts alike. but we do enjoy our own company and we like working our way through a book. A 12-hour book might take 30 hours to complete, and 30 hours on your own in a box. It's a long time.
As long as that box isn't under the ground. Like, I have visions of a coffin there for some reason. And it's
Sorry.
You referenced this earlier, Anna, that you have ADHD, and you said in your notes to me quite some time ago that this was a late diagnosis. And
Indeed.
I think there's a lot at the moment about people having late diagnoses. And indeed, my sister had one in her late 30s. Has that had an impact on who you are in the world?
I think it's actually given me more permission than I thought I had. I was under the impression that I was too loud and too much and tolerated in spaces, which always made me inhibit myself and doubt myself. And actually giving myself permission to just be me also allowed me not to berate myself for not ticking the boxes I was supposed to tick. And by supposed to, of course, what does that even mean? You know, it's the societal expectation, isn't it? So for me, perimenopause, menopause, ADHD all came together. And I spent 3 years on a waiting list through the NHS trying to get a diagnosis, during which time I did nothing, because I have ADHD, nothing but research it. So there wasn't anything I didn't already know. And I spent a lot of my time, as a lot of people do, trying to convince myself I didn't have it. Trying to say, who am I to fit into this group of poor people who obviously haven't done well in school or have been ostracized their lives? And I was trying to excuse other people's behavior around me. And there was a lot of grief when the diagnosis came through, a lot of grief about what might have been, or how much easier things might have been for me if I had realized, and more importantly, if the people around me had realized. But having said that, 2 years on, I'm now going, nobody's making excuses for anybody. Ultimately, nobody is making allowances for anyone, regardless of your gender, your skin type, your whatever. People have to get through life. You have to keep going. And so what it has done for me is given me permission to allow myself grace. And that's been a really big deal for me. The compassion for myself, which initially felt a bit like self-pity, and I was trying to get rid of it, but actually it's compassion. And awareness that nothing lasts. If I'm rubbish today, I might be better tomorrow. And that's okay. And that happens a lot and has always happened a lot. But in previous years, I've been angry and frustrated. And you know, the whole more haste, less speed. I tend to mess things up more just because I'm trying so hard to make it happen. When actually, when I'm ready and it's going to happen, it happens with ease. And so I'm all about relaxing and ease and trying to remember that it's all going to be okay. We're doing the best we can here, and that's all we can ask. So, but I was never able to say that phrase without it feeling insincere or feeling like I shouldn't just be trying harder. And I think what it did for me was just give me permission to be me, which has been nice.
And not a permission any of us need.
Shouldn't be, no.
Yeah, but it is definitely something that I think a lot of us tussle with or struggle with, to understand, well, who are we? And I guess our normal is our normal. So normal for me may not be normal for you or for the next person, and so on. And I think we really underestimate that in the world. And it really opens your mind and your life when you have that realization.
Very
That,
much so.
yeah, and actually being true to yourself. People might say it's selfish, or you're having self-pity or whatever, self-absorption, all of these things, but actually you get to be like beaming like you are.
It is lovely. And I think, again, teaching has really helped me, again, because I've done so many things in my life. I taught Spanish for a while, and I got a certificate of education, and I taught in adult education. I taught Spanish, obviously, and I loved it, absolutely loved it. Loved meeting people, finding out their life stories and their reasons for wanting to learn Spanish and so on. And what I realized when I was doing audiobooks was that I was missing meeting people. And so I started this weekly group, but then I also started coaching narrators. And one of the things that is a very popular class I give, which is, I call it elevator pitch, but ultimately it's about learning who you are and where you fit within the industry. Because as a creative, we often come in going, I've trained, there's nothing I can't do. Give me a job, just pay me to do something, I'll do anything. And that kind of desperation shows. Whereas when you come at it from a point of, I know who I am and what I offer, and if that's a match with you, then we'd make a great team. And it's a much more relaxed and an easier process to go through. And one of my favorite phrases that I always say is that we are all underwhelmed by our own abilities. We look outside ourselves and go, she's so great at French accents and he does female voices so well and she gets to read mystery thrillers and she works for whatever company. And we're always comparing, which is great for aspiration, but does nothing if you're already doubting yourself, or you have ADHD and you're under the impression that maybe it's not really where you're supposed to be at and you can't tell. It makes it difficult to know whether you're fitting in or whether they're about to pull the rug out from under you. And that precarious emotional state isn't pleasant at all. So it's important, I think, to ground yourself in your own knowledge and awareness of yourself and go, this is why I'm good at this. This is what I'm training to be better at. If I don't feel good at French accents, then I'm going to go take classes. We do need external validation with regards to, yes, you're good at this, now try this. But I think we forget sometimes to kind of take a look at ourselves and go, look how far I've come. We always look to what we haven't yet achieved or what we're not good at, and we forget to list the things we're actually really good at, and we take them for granted, and we assume everybody can do that, you know?
That's exactly what I was thinking of, is how we take ourselves for granted and have that, well, if I can do it, I guess anyone can do it.
Yes.
And that it's not boasting either to talk about stuff that you can do, because actually many people would give their right arm to be able to do it. Maybe not their right arm, but you know what I mean.
But it's almost also because of social media, we're all now having to talk about it. And particularly if you're looking to get people to employ you to read their book, you have to tell them how good you are at this thing. And people find that really difficult. But actually, I always say there's a difference between self-promotion and self-aggrandizement. Nobody likes somebody who says, oh, I can water ski off the back of 2 boats. You know, my daughter always says, it's like when you tell someone you're going to Tenerife and they're going to 11 a reef. Oh, yeah. Which I think is hysterical. And nobody likes that kind of inflated sense of self. But to be able to list the reasons, and I think it's one of the reasons that I am so educated, for want of a better word. I have certificates in everything, and it's mostly because I need to be able to say the reason I'm standing up here today is because I spent 8 weeks on a course telling me about this so I can tell you about that. And it's my way of not excusing but justifying my presence, and I need that. It's who I am. And so I think you have to find the thing that makes you feel good about yourself, the thing that allows you to be able to say, I do this because I love it. I do this because I'm really good at it. And it's great to do. And I found it, which is lovely.
It is, Anna. And thank you for sharing all of that with me today and with anyone who listens to this episode. And I think the thing I would say for you, if you've listened, you can obviously apply this to any part of your life. I know we've been talking about the work that you do, Anna, in the world, but it applies in so many ways to who we are and how we go about our day-to-day life. Anna, I am so glad to talk to you about your life beyond the numbers. Thank you for being a guest.
Thank you very much for having me.
And if people would like to know more, Anna, what's the best way of connecting with you?
I'm on all social media. My name's spelt with one N, so it's just ANA Clements, Anna Clements, and I'm at Anna Clements on all social media. And my website is annaclements.co.uk. So I'd be thrilled to hear from anyone by email, by messenger, by Instagram message, whatever your poison of choice.
And I'll put details of all of those in the show notes as well. So thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today on Life Beyond the Numbers. If something in this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to leave a review. It helps others like us discover this podcast and join in our conversation. Until next time, keep exploring the human side of work life.